Alright, while it's still raining, we're waiting for the rain to clear before we head out, I'll explain to you why the Europeans actually wanted to come down here. Why did they come all the way around Africa and all the way to Malacca? It's basically because of the spice race. Let me show you on a map. So the Europeans started to love things like pepper, right? We're talking the Europeans up here. And all of that stuff was limited to the sea trade through here. From China, the Ming Dynasty, Chinese treasure fleet, all that sort of stuff, absolutely gangster trading vessels. They would go from here, through in between the Strait of Malacca, in between Malaysia, Sumatra. They'd go to India, load up with stuff. And then from there, all of this trade that the Europeans were getting would pass mostly through the Red Sea. This is the Maritime Silk Road. Maritime just means the sea. So this is the sea version of the Silk Road, because the Silk Road originally was on foot with camels and horses and stuff, would go through here, linking east to west. So the peppers and spices would come through here, through Cairo, and they would go to Italy. Italy in the Mediterranean Sea had a lot of amazing natural ports, and that was still the Roman Empire. And then they would also mark up the price of everything. Every time it changed hands in different ports, there's also a price increase so that, you know, different empires could benefit from it. And places over here, Portugal, Spain, and then the Dutch, the British, they got sick of paying so much for spices. They wanted to find the source themselves. So Vasco da Gama, famous Portuguese explorer, he finally made it all the way around the bottom of Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. This is in the very late 1490s, all the way around, and he made it to India. And to give you an example of how much the spices were and how much profit there was in this, this took him almost a year to make it there and then back. And the cost of the finance for the trip, he was able to sell the goods for almost 100 times more than the cost of the trip itself. So that goes to show there's a lot of money in these spices and things like that. So this sort of started the spice race, and this started the monopolization, if that is even a word, the monopoly of the Maritime Silk Road and sea travel. So this brings us to the early 1500s. Just a couple years later, after Vasco da Gama makes it back, Portugal and also different powers like Spain and the Dutch, they were really looking at, okay, we need to get a fleet together and start doing this. So Portugal, rather than just have a few small exploring ships, they ended up basically having a very big fleet. They set sail and they wanted to set up trading posts. They realized they needed to actually have like a land presence as well. That's why places like Goa and Cochin have a lot of Portuguese forts and stuff like that. This is around the same time as the Vijayanagara Empire, which I've just made a video on a few videos ago in Hampi, over in India. Anyway, this brings us to here, and then they also keep hearing about Malacca, which we know Malacca was founded in the 1400s by Paramaswara. And if you remember, the Chinese treasure fleet, who prior to the Europeans, prior to the Portuguese coming, they were the big dogs in this area, right? They were huge. They had a monopoly on all of this, but they also had great relationships. They were very generous. They would give gifts everywhere they went. Well, they also had a great relationship with Paramaswara, and they helped him build an army and fight off the Siam Empire, which is in Thailand, just above Malaysia. Anyway, a lot of Chinese would set up little settlements in Malacca. They liked Malacca a lot. So that's why there's a lot of Chinese presence here, and in Malaysia in general. So it's funny because if the Portuguese were like 40 years earlier, they would have ran into and seen the Chinese treasure fleet, which their ships were like 70 times bigger than anything Portugal had. The Chinese treasure fleet was insane, but China was also fighting the Mughals at the time, and then different pass of power and different emperors coming into power. They just had different ideas in terms of what China should do. So the Chinese treasure fleet ended up disappearing. They burnt the records and all that sort of stuff. Pretty crazy, to be honest. The ships were just left in the harbor and ended up just rotting. Some was set on fire. Crazy stuff, right? The guy who was head commander of the Chinese treasure fleet, his name was, it's spelt Z-H-E-N, but it's not pronounced Zen. It's like Huan He. Z-H-E-N space H-E. Interesting name. He was the head. And he only just got recognized like 500 years later, and they have like a statue and they've named some things after him. But absolute gangster, the OG, like Christopher Columbus is, you know, nothing compared to this dude. This dude's like the OG, right? Anyway, the Portuguese, they come here and then they hear about Malacca. So in 1508, they send a little Portuguese fleet down here to investigate and to hopefully set up a trading post. And this brings us to the beginning of our story. And a lot of people think that Malacca wasn't very wealthy. The rain's just stopping now. So let's head out and I'll explain to you how wealthy the Kingdom of Malacca was.